The movie starts with a man named Straker giving errands to a delivery man, Mr. Snow, about picking up a large crate that will arrive that evening. He specifically tells him that the content of the crate is very old and heavy, but is one of a kind, so he must treat it with care. He tells him to deliver the shipment to his new home, the Marsten house, into its cellar. That night, after picking up the shipment, Mr. Snow and his assistant Hank arrive at the Marsten house. It is a house known to every resident of the town. It is said that the old owner of that house was a worshipper of Satan who took his and his family's. Mr. Snow is not interested in the stories, or rather getting scared. He just wants to bring down the package to the back of the cellar and get done with it. Though looking very stern, his voice seems a little afraid of the place, but is trying to mask it. He tells Hank to open up the cellar and the guy complains at first, but does it anyway. It's very dark and they cannot see inside the cellar clearly. They open the truck and a long wooden box is there, waiting to be picked up. They carry the very heavy box down the cellar while speculating on what might be the content. Mr. Snow says that he has been told it's an antique dresser, although it seems way too heavy for one. Hank cannot see where he is going due to the dark and bumps into a cabinet, breaking some bottles placed atop it. The box slips from his hand and it falls to the ground, damaging a corner. They see that dirt is spilling from the broken box, and Hank wonders why a dresser will be packed with dirt. Mr. Snow is not interested to know, and just wants the delivery to be over with. They continue to pick up the box and succeed in placing it at the back of the cellar. He is about to walk away when Mr. Snow hears a rustle coming from the box. Then he hears a raspy whisper, calling out his name. He looks back at the box and is stepping in closer, as if hypnotized by the voice. The top of the box suddenly starts opening, and Mr. Snow is enticed to come closer, but regains consciousness after Hank calls him. He scrambles to get away from the cellar as soon as possible, and closes it. In the dark, we hear the creaking of the wooden box, and a horrifying creature rises from it. The next day, our main character, Ben Mears, is sitting in his car, observing the Marsten house from afar. He gets frightened as the town sheriff, Parkins, knocks on his window and asks if he is lost. He tells the officer that he is just sightseeing, saying he used to live in this town. Parkins sees some books sprawled in his car and asks if he is an author, and Ben confirms this. The officer tells him not to make any trouble while he is in town, as trouble makes work for him, and he doesn't like to work. What a lazy officer. Ben assures him that he won't be any trouble. He is just there for some inspiration. Then, Parkins leaves him. He goes on driving into Salem's Lot and arrives in the town center where people are going on about their quiet and simple lives. He sees a real estate office and walks inside. The lady at the front desk, named Susan, who is reading a book, sees him and tells him he looks familiar. Unbeknownst to her, she is facing the very person who wrote the book she is reading. He doesn't tell her who he is, thinking she will figure it out later, but she doesn't, making it awkward for Ben. She asks him what she can help with, and he says he is looking for a place to rent. The owner of the agency walks in and greets Ben, introducing himself. Ben asks if anyone is living in the Marsten house right now. He tells Ben that it's been sitting vacant for almost 40 years, but someone recently bought it. When asked who bought it, he tells Ben it's a European guy who is also opening up the Barlow and Straker shop across the street. Susan asks him how he knows about the Marsten house. He tells them he used to live there, and says his name. Susan realizes he is the author of the book she is reading, and suddenly feels embarrassed for not recognizing him. The agency's owner asks if he is looking to buy a property in town, but Ben tells him he is just looking to rent. Susan butts in, advising him a woman named Eva Miller has a place available. As he leaves, Susan slumps her face on the table, filled with embarrassment from the encounter. Ben arrives at Eva Miller's place, and she shows him the available room. She tells him the rules and advises that no guests are allowed there. Upon learning he is a writer, Eva tells him bluntly that she will take advance payments, as if she doesn't trust that a writer could pay. The struggle of being a writer. This makes Ben chuckle a little. Life in Salem's Lot is very simple and peaceful. At the town's elementary school, 3 kids are seen playing some kind of game. One of the kids, Danny, is tying up his friend Mark's hands with a rope, while his brother Ralph tries to help. Mark tells him to make it real tight and time him to see how many minutes it takes before he can unbind his hands from the rope. Other kids are watching them when they notice the school bully approaching. Mark starts trying to untie the rope, but the bully punches his face. Everyone is scared to intervene, as no one ever stands up to the bully. To their surprise, Mark gets up after getting his hands free. The bully notices this and approaches again to attack Mark, but he dodges, causing the bully to fall flat on his face. Then, Mark wrestles him, giving him a taste of his own medicine until the bully surrenders. One of the teachers, Mr. Burke, sees this and steps out to intervene, breaking them off. The bully warns Mark to watch his back before going away. Mr. Burke is quite impressed at Mark standing up to the school bully. However, he advises him that if someone already surrenders, he should let them go. He tells him that they take people by their word in Salem's Lot. That afternoon, at the town center, kids have just finished the day's classes and are walking home. Straker is fixing some clothes by his shop's window and sees the kids passing by. He stares at them for a few minutes as if planning something ominous. Meanwhile, at the library, Ben is researching about the Marsten house when Susan and her mother walk in. Her mother is pestering her about why she has declined the love proposal of a guy in their town who is from a good family. Susan just shushes her up, reminding her that they are in the library. Mabel, the town's librarian, pries on their conversation, asking who they are talking about, but Susan tells her to mind her business. Then she tells them that Ben is currently in the library, showing them one of his books. Mabel tells them about his past, saying he lived in their town as a boy, but 20 years ago, his parents' lives were taken due to a car crash caused by a drunk driver. They start wondering why he came back after his tragic past. This seems to pique Susan's curiosity about him. Mabel asks if they have any big plans for the weekend, and Susan discreetly drops a book to catch Ben's attention, and she succeeds. As soon as Ben looks in her direction, she answers Mabel out loud, saying she is going to the drive-in theater tonight, as if taunting Ben to go too. At Mark's house, Ralph and Danny hang out with him, and they see all the vampire stuff he has in his room. It seems that Mark has a deep fascination for vampire hunting. Ralph comments how Mark is not afraid of anything. He asks Mark what he will do if the bully comes for him again with the big kids. Mark sternly answers that if he comes for him, he will fight back again, telling the brothers that running away only makes it worse. Danny tells his brother that they should get going. It's getting dark soon and little Ralphie is scared of the dark. Ralph denies this. Mark gives him a harmonica, telling him that if he blows on it, it will help with his breathing and calm him down. At the drive-in theater, viewers start pulling up. Ben is already there, and Susan parks beside his car. She notices that the sun is already setting, meaning the show will be starting soon. She tells him that she knows of a secret spot with the best view of the show, and asks if he wants to join her. Ben gladly follows. The dark starts setting. Danny and Ralph are now walking home when Straker passes by and greets them. He asks the two if they are lost and offers to give them a lift to wherever they need to go. Danny looks at him weirdly and refuses the offer. Then, they start walking into the woods, seemingly taking a shortcut to home. Straker looks at the two while they walk away. At the drive-in theater, Susan and Ben are sitting on a roof, indeed having the best view as she promised. She tells Ben that every car in there tells a story. She points out to one car after another, telling stories about each car owner. From the cheating Mr. Zimmerman, to a couple breaking up for the 10th time, to the town priest, Father Callahan, who is quietly getting drunk in his car. Ben asks Susan about her story. She tries to brush it off, but Ben pushes her to tell more about herself. She shares that she is trying to get her real estate license until she can build an agency on her own. She also plans on moving back to Boston. She only came back to Salem's Lot to help her mom take care of her ill dad, who sadly passed away last year. However, her mom is trying everything to make her stay and not leave her. Susan in turn asks Ben why he came back. He tells her he is there to research about his past. He recalls that he used to live there until he was 9, but had to go live with relatives after losing his parents. He shares that it's always felt like he ran away from Salem's Lot, so coming back is his way of reclaiming home. In the woods, the Glick brothers, Danny and Ralph, are still walking home. Ralph is playing the harmonica Mark gave him, helping him not to feel scared. They hear a rustling behind them, but they see no one. Then, Straker quietly appears behind Ralph and snatches him, covering his mouth to conceal his screams. The oblivious Danny keeps walking, unaware that his little brother has just been taken. Then, he notices that he isn't there anymore and calls for his brother, but he is already gone. Ralph keeps struggling inside the sack, crying while he is gagged. Then, the creature seen in the earlier part of the movie is seen going down the stairs. Outside, Ralph's screams echo, with no one around to hear it. The next morning, in the police station, Parkins walks to a cell and wakes up Father Callahan, who got wasted last night. It appears that he asked Parkins himself last night to detain him, as a form of atonement. Before he goes, he advises the priest that he might want to swing by the Glicks, as the news of Ralph going missing is now spread all over town. The townspeople are forming a search party. He asks Parkins what he is doing about it, but the officer doesn't seem to care too much. He is only concerned about his retirement. Ben is helping with searching for Ralph. He meets Mr. Burke there, and they introduce themselves. Susan arrives and tells them that she heard Parkins might stop the search soon. Mr. Burke comments that it's a shame that Danny doesn't remember anything from last night, to help them find Ralph. At Susan's house, her mother is playing the piano when she hears a car pulling up. She sees that it's Susan with Ben, and doesn't seem too pleased. Susan explains that it's because Ben is an outsider and might take her daughter away from her. In Danny's room, he can't sleep thinking about his little brother, whose bed is now empty. He hears a rustling outside the window and checks it out. He thinks it's Ralph, so he goes outside to call for him. However, he doesn't find anyone there, and instead finds Ralph's harmonica given by Mark. Then, in a snap, he gets snatched by someone. His mother suddenly gets awakened and sees Danny standing right in front of her. Danny tells her that he feels sick, so they take him to the hospital. According to the doctor, it's pernicious anemia, a deficiency preventing the body from creating more red blood cells. He is currently having blood transfusions. Later, while his mother is napping, Danny keeps reaching for the bag of blood. Then, his mom awakens and notices this. Danny weakly tells her that he's thirsty, so she calls a nurse to ask for water. However, as soon as she turns around, she sees Danny gulping down the bag of and then passes out. The next day, he passes away. At the cemetery, Father Callahan is talking to the gravedigger, Mike. They both watch as people start approaching the grave where Danny is to be buried. While the burial is ongoing, Mike eats his snack and falls asleep behind a tree. When he wakes up, it is already nighttime. He starts filling the grave with dirt, but suddenly hears knocking from the casket. He thinks at first that it's only his imagination. And then, he hears Danny calling for help from inside the casket. He hurriedly jumps to open it, but finds that Danny is still lifeless. He goes back up and is about to continue burying the casket, but sees that it's open now, and Danny is not inside. Fear creeps in, and as he is about to run away, a now vampire Danny attacks him. The next scene takes us to a bar. Mr. Burke sees Mike in a dark corner of the room. He notices that he doesn't look too good, and asks if he is sick. Mike looks so pale, and he says he is sick with something. Mr. Burke asks how long he has been sick, but Mike doesn't remember. He only remembers that, after Danny's funeral, he passed out, but he is not sure how long. He looks really scared and doesn't want to go home. Mr. Burke tells him he can see the doctor the next day, but for now, he can stay with him. At his home, Mr. Burke gives him some medicine and sees bite marks on Mike's neck. Mike doesn't know how he got those marks. Mr. Burke seems to have just realized something and closes the room's window. Moments later, Mr. Burke is pacing back and forth in his room, thinking about Mike's situation. Then, he hears knocks on the window upstairs. He goes outside to check who it is and sees someone going inside Mike's window. Ben is with Susan in his room when his landlady knocks and tells him Mr. Burke is looking for him. They both go down to meet Mr. Burke. He asks them if they have a cross of any kind. Then, he asks them to come with him. As they arrive at his house, he tells the two of what has just happened. Mr. Burke already suspects that Mike has become some kind of creature of the night. The lights have gone off in the whole house. They all walk inside Mike's room, where he is motionless. Mr. Burke asks them to shut the window. He touches Mike's hand, but it's stone cold. His hand suddenly drops to the floor. Mr. Burke observes that the bite marks on Mike's neck are gone. He shares that according to folklore, the bite marks disappear after perishing. Then the transformation could take from hours to days. He suspects that Mike is turning into a vampire. They call Parkins and Dr. Cody to report Mike's demise and agree that they will not mention anything about vampires to them. The doctor confirms that Mike is deceased. Mr. Burke asks Dr. Cody what the cause of Danny's end is, hinting that it is similar to Mike's. Dr. Cody says that the disease is not something one can catch, so she cannot see the connection between the two. Meanwhile, in Mark's room, he is sleeping when he hears a knock on his window. He wears his glasses and sees Danny floating mid-air, asking to be let in. Danny looks into Mark's eyes, hypnotizing him to open the window. And so Mark does. Danny tells him that his master, Mr. Barlow, wants to meet him and bares his fangs. Then, Mark sees that the cross in his vampire items collection is lighting up, sensing the presence of a vampire. Mark picks up the cross and puts it on Danny's face, making him disappear. He swears to himself that he will set his friend free. He proceeds to study more about how to defeat vampires from his comics. He figures that he has to slay their master, Barlow. At Mr. Burke's, he is also studying vampires when he hears rustling. As he turns around, he sees Mike, who is now a vampire. He picks up the cross on his desk and points it to Mike. This works as Mike goes to hide. However, as he continues to search, Mike pounces on him and he loses the cross. Mike attacks him and tells him to stop fighting and join them, saying that Barlow wants to meet him. Mike is about to hypnotize him when he finally gets a hold of the cross again, showing it to Mike while shouting that he is revoking his invitation. Mike is pushed away by the power of the cross. The next day, Dr. Cody receives news that Mrs. Glick, Danny's mom, has been found lifeless this morning. Dr. Cody goes to Mr. Burke's place and finds him injured. She tells him about the news of Mrs. Glick. Moments later, the two of them meet up with Ben and Susan to talk about the worsening situation. Mr. Burke figures out that Straker must be Barlow's apprentice. He also figures out that Ralph must have been used as a to consecrate the grounds for Barlow's arrival, while Danny must have been turned into a vampire now. Ben suggests that they should exhume Danny's body to prove their theory. Dr. Cody is opposed to exhuming the boy's body, so she suggests they examine the mother's body instead, since it's still in the mortuary. She was told that she passed in the same way as Danny. They agree that the three of them should go, while Mr. Burke will research Barlow and Straker more. Mark arrives at the Marsten house with a wooden stake and opens the cellar, ready to attack the enemy. He runs into Mr. Burke there, who has the same intention. While they are talking, Straker closes the cellar's entrance, causing the whole room to be dark. Mr. Burke lights up a candle while keeping Mark close to him. While he is helping Mark open the door, Barlow emerges from his casket and attacks Mr. Burke while Barlow snatches Mark. In the morgue, Ben and the ladies are examining Mrs. Glick's body. Susan asks how they can protect themselves if ever the deceased rises as a vampire. Then, Mrs. Glick's corpse suddenly starts moving, calling Danny. Dr. Cody improvises to make a cross while the corpse starts getting up and walks toward them. All of them are shaking while trying to make the cross. Then Susan tells Ben to bless it. He nervously starts blessing it with prayer, and the cross glows. The corpse starts laughing at their nervous prayer. Unfortunately, the cross breaks as they were not able to bind it properly. The corpse jumps into Dr. Cody. It tells her that there will be no one left, and even now, their circle is becoming smaller. Then, it bites Dr. Cody. Fortunately, Susan binds the cross successfully and extinguishes the vampire, which just turned into dust. Dr. Cody asks for her bag and instructs them to give her a rabies shot to prevent the spread of the vampire's venom. Ben puts the cross near her to test if she has been infected, and luckily, it doesn't glow, meaning she's safe. At the Marsten house, Mark is bound but manages to escape and ends up taking Straker's life, then escapes. The three go to Father Callahan to tell him about the vampires. At first, Father Callahan cannot believe what they are saying. Then, Mark walks into the church, informing them that Mr. Burke is one of the vampires now. He tells them that he will go after the vampires but just needs some supplies. He also tells them that he has just slain Straker, as it was the only way he could get out. Father Callahan asks Mark to show him where all of it transpired, so they all go to the Marsten house. They find their way to the cellar where they run into Mr. Burke, who is now a vampire. Ben stabs him with the stake, but it doesn't stop him. As he is attacking them, he warns that Barlow will be coming for all of them and their families tonight. Then, Susan and the others manage to open the cellar door, burning Mr. Burke. Ben ends up stabbing him through the heart, one of the ways to slay a vampire. The sun is setting, and they decide to go to their families to get them to the church by sundown. It's protected soil, and the vampires won't be able to get in. Dr. Cody decides to go to Parkins to ask for help, but sees him getting ready to leave the lot. He knows that Barlow is taking over Salem's lot soon, and all he cares about is escaping to save himself. Susan arrives at her house to warn her mom. However, she tells Susan that she met someone who promised her that he would do everything to take care of her and Susan. Susan asks her mom who the guy is, and she says it's Barlow. Then, a vampire emerges and bites Susan. Instead of shooting the vampire, Susan's mom is more concerned about not letting Ben take Susan away from her. At Mark's house, he and Father Callahan are trying to convince his parents that they need to go to the church, but they do not believe him. Then, they hear a knock from outside, so Mark's dad checks it. In the next second, Barlow himself appears and bites Mark's mom. Father Callahan points across at him, but Barlow is not fazed by it at all. Father Callahan's faith wavers, and the power of the cross starts to fade. Then, Barlow attacks him. Mark runs to his treehouse but gets followed by other kids who have turned into vampires. They keep tempting him to come with them. Mark closes all the windows, knowing that the vampires can only get in if he invites them inside. At the church, only Dr. Cody is there. Susan has been infected by the vampire's bite, and she's already reacting to holy ground, meaning there's no saving her now. Dr. Cody tells Ben that there is only one way to save her, and that is to stab her through her heart and let her rest eternally. Ben refuses to do so, giving Susan the chance to run away from the church. He follows her outside but gets surrounded by all of the vampires. As one flies and snatches him, Dr. Cody throws a stake at him, and he manages to slay the vampire. More are coming their way, so Dr. Cody scares them with a cross. Ben tells Dr. Cody that Susan's mom is now Barlow's new servant. Then, the body of the deceased sheriff flies through the church's roof, and they can hear the vampires outside, laughing at them. The morning comes, allowing them to roam around town safely. They go to Mark's house and find that everyone is gone. They find Mark's note on the table, and they feel relieved that he is alive. Mark is determined to extinguish Barlow. He goes to Straker's shop trying to find anything that can help. He finds Danny there, and ends up stabbing him in his chest, fulfilling his promise that he will free his friend from his misery. Ben and Dr. Cody eventually find him, and are about to take him with them to leave town, but Mark refuses. He says they need to fight back. If they choose to escape now, eventually, Barlow will just come after them. Dr. Cody agrees, saying she feels that the vampires are still in town, somewhere. Ben notices that there are no cars around, and figures out that they must all be in the drive-in theater, hiding in their trunks until the sun sets. It turns out that he is right as they see that the drive-in is indeed filled with cars. He searches for Susan's car, and finds her there, sleeping. The two give him a stake to put an end to Susan's misery, but Ben could not do it. Dr. Cody decides to do it for him, but suddenly gets shot by Susan's crazy mother. She keeps shooting at Ben and Mark. The sun is already setting, and as the dark spreads through the field, the vampires come out one by one from their trunks. Ben and Mark run to the part where there is still sunlight, but Ben gets held back by vampires. They jump at him and Ben struggles to keep them away. An idea comes to Mark. He starts a car and drives it to the theater's screen, knocking down its foundations. As the screen falls, sunlight burns the vampires, saving Ben. However, Susan's mother is still shooting at him. As she gets nearer, Mark drives in her direction, running her over. The sun's almost down and they have to find Barlow before that. They find his coffin in a truck and bring it out. They try to open it, but don't succeed. As the dark finally comes, the coffin opens by itself with a bang, and Barlow comes out. They try to hide, but Susan finds them and attacks Ben. Mark gets thrown outside and sees Barlow, so he hurries to hide. Meanwhile, Ben finally succeeds at stabbing Susan through her chest. Outside, Barlow is coming after Mark and almost gets him until Ben stabs him through his mouth and then through his chest, finally defeating the monster. After all that transpired, Ben and Mark are now finally safe. They get into a car and drive away from the town, making their escape from Jerusalem's lot.